The lake had always been my sanctuary. 80 acres of open rangeland and a private lake I inherited from my grandfather, a man who believed that peace came from land, hard work, and the quiet sound of water lapping against the dock. For years, it was just me, my wife, and the hum of cicadas in the summer evenings. That peace started to crack the moment the HOA moved in. The new subdivision sprouted up 5 years ago, almost overnight, on the other side of the tree line. Cookie-cutter houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and neighbors who seemed to live for gossip and rules. I kept my distance. They didn't bother me, and I didn't bother them, at least, not until Karen appeared. Karen was the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA. Platinum blonde bob, designer sunglasses even on cloudy days, and a voice that carried like a siren. I'd heard stories, how she fined neighbors for unauthorized lawn chairs, how she reported someone for painting their door the wrong shade of blue, but I figured if I kept to myself, I'd stay off her radar. I was wrong. The first time I realized something was off was a quiet Saturday morning. I'd driven my truck down the gravel path to check the fencing by the south pasture when I spotted movement near the lake. At first, I thought it was just a couple of hikers who'd taken a wrong turn. But when I got closer, I saw a full-blown setup on my dock, coolers, folding chairs, a grill, even a Bluetooth speaker blasting pop music across the water. And there, in the middle of it all, was Karen. She turned around as if she owned the place, flashing that blinding smile. "Oh, you must be the groundskeeper," she chirped, waving me off like I was some hired help. "Could you grab a few extra trash bags from the shed? My son invited some friends, and it's going to be a big party." For a moment, I was too stunned to respond. "Excuse me," I finally said, stepping closer. Karen rolled her eyes like I was being slow. "This lake," she said, gesturing to the water, "is part of the HOA's community amenities now. We filed the paperwork weeks ago and transferred it to my son. He's technically the owner now. So if you could just, stay out of the way, we'd appreciate it." I stared at her, trying to process the audacity. "Lady," I said evenly, "this lake is on my land. It's been in my family for decades. You're trespassing." She gave a dismissive laugh. "Oh, that's cute, but you really should check the updated HOA guidelines. Records can change. Honestly, you should be thanking us. We're increasing the value of this property by integrating it into the community." I didn't bother arguing. Instead, I turned on my heel, went back to my truck, and pulled the deed from the glove compartment. I'd kept the original, notarized copy for moments just like this. Walking back to the dock, I held it out for her to see. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is the deed. My name, my land, my lake. You have exactly 10 minutes to clear out, or I'll have the sheriff down here writing trespassing citations." For a brief second, I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. But then that fake smile was back, brighter than ever. "We'll see about that," she said with a shrug. "But don't worry, we'll still let you use the lake. Just remember, access comes with HOA fees now." By the time I walked back to the house, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with anger. I dialed my attorney before I even stepped inside. "Alan," I said when he picked up, "pull my property line documents and get ready for a fight. The HOA thinks they own my lake." He sighed, like this wasn't the first time he'd heard something like it. "Send me pictures. We'll handle it." But Karen wasn't done. By evening, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up my gravel driveway, lights flashing, as Karen marched up behind them, gesturing wildly toward the lake. "That's him," she shouted, pointing at me like she was leading a manhunt. "He's trespassing and threatening us. My son owns that lake now, and he's harassing everyone. Arrest him." One of the deputies stepped forward, calm but clearly confused. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance. Are you the property owner?" Wordlessly, I handed him the folder I'd prepared. Inside were the original land surveys, the deed, and a statement from the county assessor's office, all ironclad proof that the lake was mine. The deputy flipped through the papers, eyebrows rising with every page. He turned back toward Karen, his tone clipped. "Ma'am, this property is clearly in his name. He's not trespassing, you are." Karen's face turned bright red. "That can't be right," she stammered. "The HOA board approved the transfer. We sent him notices. This is a community space now." The second deputy, older and clearly less patient, shook his head. "Ma'am, notices don't change legal ownership. This is his land. You and your group need to pack up and leave, or we'll start issuing citations." For a moment, she just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, with a dramatic huff, she grabbed her son's arm and stormed off toward the parking lot, muttering something about lawyers and lawsuits. I watched them go, my pulse finally settling. But I knew, deep down, this wasn't over. Sure enough, the next morning, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA had fined me $10,000 for interfering with the community use of shared spaces. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because here's what Karen and her little HOA cronies didn't know. When that subdivision was built, the developer didn't buy the land outright. They leased it, from a family trust. And that trust, I controlled it. The letter from the HOA sat on my kitchen table like a bad joke, the $10,000 fine, printed in bold at the top. I almost wanted to frame it, just so I could look back later and laugh at the sheer audacity. But at that moment, my anger was bubbling over. I picked up the phone and called Alan, my attorney. They just fined me 10 grand, I said, my voice sharp. For interfering with community property. Alan chuckled, calm as ever. Let me guess, Karen again. Who else? I muttered. Send me the letter, Alan said, still sounding amused. They're bluffing. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. I'll draft a cease and desist to remind them of the law. But if you really want this to stop. I cut him off. I know. It's time they learned who actually holds the reins around here. For years, I'd quietly managed the trust that leased the HOA their land. Every house in that subdivision sat on a parcel controlled by the same contract. Their community pool, their tennis courts, even their so-called HOA office, all of it was tied to that lease. I'd never bothered to interfere because, frankly, they'd never given me a reason to. Until now. The next morning, I drove into town to the county recorder's office and requested copies of the subdivision's lease agreements. The clerk handed them over with a sympathetic smile. Apparently, I wasn't the first landowner to have trouble with an overzealous HOA. With the paperwork spread across my desk, I highlighted every clause that gave me control, maintenance permissions, use restrictions, the right to revoke access in case of violations. They had violated at least a dozen terms. I drafted my own letter that night. Greater than notice of lease violation and pending revocation. Effective immediately, all non-resident access to lake name is revoked pending review of your lease compliance. Further trespassing will be prosecuted. Additionally, due to multiple contractual violations, a hearing has been scheduled to discuss termination of the HOA's lease rights. My full name, trustee and landowner. By the next afternoon, I'd posted copies of the letter at every entrance to the lake and on the HOA's office door. And that's when the chaos began. I was out repairing the north fence line when I heard the shouting. From the ridge above my property, I could see the pool deck at the subdivision. A cluster of homeowners had gathered, waving the posted notices and yelling at Karen, who was standing on a lawn chair trying to calm them down. This has to be illegal. One man shouted, our property values will tank without lake access. I told you, another woman snapped, we shouldn't have let you push him like that. Karen, flustered but still trying to maintain her queen bee facade, waved her arms dramatically. Relax, everyone. This is just a scare tactic. He doesn't have that kind of authority. She was still mid-rant when my attorney, Alan, strolled up with a clipboard and a camera crew from the local news station in tow. Actually, Alan said, loud enough for everyone to hear, he does. And if you'd bothered to read the lease before trying to seize private property, you'd know that. The crowd went silent. Karen's face drained of color, and for the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. The news crew had been my idea. Small-town media loves a scandal, and what better way to make my point than letting the entire county see the HOA exposed for overstepping their bounds. By that evening, the story was everywhere. Greater than local rancher says HOA tried to seize his lake, now he's revoking their access. The phone calls started pouring in, neighbors apologizing, people I'd never met thanking me for standing up to the HOA, and, predictably, a few angry board members threatening legal action. I ignored them all. Instead, I scheduled the lease review hearing for the following week at the community center, a space they didn't own, by the way, because it sat on my land too. When the day arrived, the place was packed. Homeowners filled every chair, standing along the walls, whispering among themselves. Karen sat at the front table, flanked by two board members, her smile brittle and her hands clutching a stack of papers. I walked in, calm and collected, and laid a folder of documents on the table. Good evening, I said. As most of you know, I own the land your community sits on, including the lake you've been using. I've stayed out of your business for years because I believe in being a good neighbor. But that courtesy ended when your board, without any authority, claimed my private property and attempted to reassign ownership. That is a violation of your lease, and it gives me full legal right to revoke your access. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Someone shouted, she told us she had approval, pointing a finger at Karen. I slid copies of the deed and the lease down the table toward her. Here's the documentation. Read it, understand it, and then explain to your residents why you lied. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She shuffled through the papers, but there was nothing she could say. She had been caught. Alan leaned forward, his tone sharp. As of now, the lake is off limits to the HOA. Continued violations will result in legal action, including possible termination of your entire lease. That means your pool, your parks, even this community center, gone. The room erupted. Homeowners who had once blindly supported Karen turned on her instantly, shouting, demanding answers. Karen, red-faced and sputtering, tried to talk over the noise, but no one was listening anymore. I let the chaos simmer for a moment before raising my hand for silence. I'm not unreasonable, I said. You want access. Fine. But there will be new terms that include respect for property lines and an HOA board that doesn't think it's above the law. You have 7 days to elect new leadership and sign the revised agreement. Otherwise, the gates stay locked. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, her heels clacking angrily against the tile, trailed by the very people who used to hang on her every word. Within 48 hours, she was gone, voted out by a unanimous decision. The new board president, a quiet man named Robert, came to my ranch the next morning. He shook my hand firmly. "We're sorry," he said simply. "She never spoke for all of us. We'd like to make this right." And we did. The new agreement was fair. The HOA could continue using the lake under clear rules, no unauthorized events, no guests without permission, and absolutely no attempts to claim ownership. In exchange, I allowed them access again, and even offered to help maintain the shoreline and docks. As for Karen, she moved out within the month, too embarrassed to face the community she'd once controlled. Life slowly returned to normal after that. Evenings on the dock with my wife, quiet mornings with a cup of coffee watching the mist rise off the water, the peace I'd fought for was back. And the best part, every year, like clockwork, the HOA cuts a check, straight to the trust I control, for the privilege of enjoying my lake. Funny thing about power, sometimes the loudest person in the room is the one with the least of it.